The crystal valley gleamed under the alien suns, fragments of light dancing across Mara Ellis's visor as she carefully catalogued another specimen. The xenobiologist adjusted her scanner, the device humming softly as it processed the cellular structure of the translucent flora before her. 3 weeks into her expedition on KPX-9, and every day still brought discoveries that challenged fundamental principles of exobiology. Command wants another update. The voice of Dr. Lian Cho crackled through her comm. Shall I tell them you're busy making friends with the local vegetation again? Mara smiled despite herself. Tell them I've documented 17 new species since yesterday. The crystalline composition in the local flora suggests adaptive evolution to the high radiation atmosphere. It's remarkable. I'm sure Commander Voss will be thrilled, Leon replied, her voice tinged with sarcasm. He's much more interested in mineral deposits than pretty plants, as he calls them. Mara carefully extracted a sample from the crystal-veined leaf before her, watching as the plant sealed its wound almost immediately with a diamond-like secretion. The Confederation only sees resources to exploit. They don't understand what we have here. Technically, she wasn't wrong. In the vast galactic Confederation hierarchy, humans ranked embarrassingly low, a relatively new species with limited technological advancements compared to the ancient civilizations that dominated the Alliance. Earth had joined the interstellar community barely 2 centuries ago, and humans were still considered somewhat primitive, relegated mostly to scientific expeditions and minor diplomatic roles. KPX-9, positioned in the outer reaches of the Zaria star system, was deemed a tertiary exploration target by Confederation standards, too hostile for colonization, with no immediately obvious valuable resources. Perfect for a small research team, led by a human scientist, to document its ecosystem without interference from higher-ranking species. Or at least, that had been the plan. As Mara packed her sampling kit, the ground beneath her trembled. Not the familiar seismic activity that occasionally rippled through the Crystal Valley. This was different, more rhythmic, almost like footsteps. She froze, hand instinctively moving to the small defensive stunner at her hip, a largely symbolic gesture, as the weapon would barely inconvenience most of the larger predators she documented on KPX-9. Leon, she whispered into her comm. I'm picking up something big moving through the northwest quadrant. Can you see anything on the perimeter sensors? Static answered her. The crystalline formations in the valley often interfered with communications, creating dead zones throughout the research area. Mara hesitated. Protocol dictated an immediate return to the research station when potential threats were detected. 3 researchers had already been lost on frontier planets this year alone. The Confederation considered such casualties acceptable losses for scientific advancement. But curiosity had always been Mara's defining trait, and her greatest vulnerability. Instead of retreating, she moved cautiously toward a ridge of amethyst-colored crystals, adjusting her scanner to detect life signs. What she saw through her binoculars stole her breath. A Krenth, even wounded and dragging itself through the crystal debris. The creature was magnificent, standing nearly 3 meters tall when upright, with gleaming obsidian exoskeleton and neural tendrils that pulsed with bioluminescent energy. The Krenth were among the most feared apex predators in the known galaxy. Their civilization was ancient, predating even the Confederation itself, and they rarely engaged with other species except to establish territorial boundaries that were never, ever crossed without severe consequences. Mara had only seen them in restricted xenobiology archives. The Krenth were classified as Tier 1 sentients in the Confederation hierarchy, near the very top of the interspecies ranking system. Humans, by comparison, were Tier 7, barely above artificial intelligences. This particular specimen was gravely injured. Fluorescent blue blood oozed from multiple lacerations across its carapace, and one of its 4 primary limbs hung at an unnatural angle. Whatever had attacked it must have been formidable indeed. Krenth were known for their regenerative abilities and physical resilience. Every scientific protocol and Confederation directive was absolutely clear. Avoid all contact with Tier 1 species unless officially sanctioned. Interfering with a wounded Krenth was expressly forbidden, carrying penalties ranging from career termination to potential criminal charges. And yet, Mara watched as the creature collapsed, its bioluminescent patterns flickering weakly, a sign of critical life functions failing. "This is a terrible idea," she whispered to herself, already unslinging her field medical kit. Some decisions transcend regulations. Some moments define who we truly are. Dr. Mara Ellis made her choice. The Krenth's neural tendrils flared defensively as Mara approached, a warning display that would normally precede a lethal attack. But, in its weakened state, the creature could only manage a threatening hiss. Mandibles clicking in what xenobiologists theorized was an expression of pain or aggression. "I'm not going to hurt you," Mara said softly, knowing full well the Krenth couldn't understand her words, but hoping her tone might convey her intentions. She moved slowly, placing her medical scanner on the ground between them and activating its holographic display. The Krenth's compound eyes shifted, focusing on the three-dimensional representation of its own physiology now rotating above the device. Mara had studied enough xenobiology to recognize the Krenth's primary circulatory system was compromised, with significant trauma to what appeared to be a secondary cardiac structure. What surprised her was the Krenth's reaction. Rather than striking out, it extended a trembling limb toward the hologram, touching specific areas where damage was most severe. It was communicating. "You understand," Mara whispered in amazement. "You know what this shows." The creature emitted a series of clicks and subsonic rumbles that Mara's translator couldn't process. Then, with deliberate movements that must have caused excruciating pain, it dragged itself closer to her medical kit. "I'm going to help you," she said, reaching slowly for a universal plasma sealant. "This will hurt, but it should stop the bleeding." Working with efficiency born from years of field medicine, Mara began treating the Krenth's wounds. The creature remained unnervingly still, its neural tendrils occasionally brushing against her arms with feather-light touches that sent chills down her spine. Whether these were intentional communications or involuntary spasms, she couldn't tell. 3 hours passed in this strange communion of human and predator. Mara set the broken limb with a lightweight carbon fiber splint, sealed the worst of the lacerations with medical polymer, and administered a broad-spectrum antibiotic compatible with most carbon-based life forms. "That's the best I can do without proper equipment," she finally said, sitting back on her heels. "The rest is up to your biology." The Krenth's neural tendrils pulsed with a rhythm she hadn't observed before, slower, more measured. Its compound eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that felt almost contemplative. Then it did something that defied every xenobiological study she had ever read about the species. It lowered its massive head until it nearly touched the ground, a posture of submission or deference that contradicted everything known about Krenth dominance behaviors. Mara's comm unit suddenly crackled to life, making her jump. "Mara! Thank the stars!" Leon's voice was pitched high with panic. "Where have you been? Command has been trying to reach you for hours. There's—" Static interrupted her words. "Unidentified ship detected in orbit. Not Confederation. They're sending a security team to extract us. You need to return to base immediately." The Krenth's neural tendrils flared at the sound of the communication, its posture instantly shifting from submission to alert vigilance. "I'm on my way," Mara responded, already gathering her equipment. "ETA 20 minutes." She turned to the wounded predator, torn between her duty to return and her concern for the creature's survival. "I have to go," she said, knowing it couldn't understand. "Try to stay hidden." As Mara turned to leave, the Krenth reached out with startling speed, catching her wrist in a surprisingly gentle grip. Its neural tendrils brushed against her skin, and for a moment, she felt a strange sensation, like an electrical current carrying fragments of emotion, gratitude, urgency, warning. Then it released her and retreated into a crevice formed by towering crystal formations, its dark exoskeleton blending perfectly with the shadows. Mara stood frozen for a moment, heart pounding. Then she ran, her mind racing faster than her feet. What she had done violated at least a dozen Confederation protocols. If anyone discovered she had treated a Krenth, a Tier 1 species, without authorization. But a more immediate concern pressed upon her. Unidentified ships in orbit rarely meant anything good for small research outposts. And if they weren't Confederation, who were they? The research station was in controlled chaos when Mara arrived. Security personnel in Confederation Gray were already securing equipment and preparing the team for emergency evacuation. Lian rushed to her side, face pale with stress. "Where have you been? Commander Voss is furious." "Lost communication in the crystal formations," Mara lied smoothly, avoiding her colleague's eyes. "What's happening?" Before Lian could answer, Commander Voss strode toward them, his expression thunderous. As the Confederation military liaison assigned to the research team, Voss had always viewed the scientific mission as secondary to maintaining security protocols, and he had never bothered to hide his disdain for what he called human scientific dabbling. "Dr. Ellis," he said, his voice clipped. "How convenient that you reappeared just as we're evacuating." Mara straightened her spine, meeting his gaze steadily. "I was collecting final samples. What's the situation?" "The situation," Voss replied coldly, "is that an unidentified vessel entered orbit approximately 4 hours ago. Long-range scans suggest—" He hesitated. Something unusual for the typically direct commander. "The configuration matches known Valkyra warships." Mara felt her blood run cold. The Valkyra, the elite military force of the Krenth species, renowned and feared throughout the galaxy. If they were here... "Why would the Valkyra come to KPX-9?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "That's what I intend to find out," Voss replied. "But not with civilian scientists underfoot. You're being evacuated to the secondary outpost on Zaria's moon. The security team will remain to establish contact, or defend the station if necessary." "But our research," Mara began. "Is expendable," Voss cut her off. "Unlike Confederation lives, transport leaves in 30 minutes. I suggest you pack only essential personal items." As he walked away, Lian gripped Mara's arm tightly. "This is bad," she whispered. "The Valkyra never leave their territory without purpose, and that purpose is rarely diplomatic." Mara nodded numbly, her mind racing. Could this be connected to the wounded Krenth she had treated? The timing seemed too coincidental. But how would the Valkyra even know one of their kind was injured on KPX-9? "I need to check something in the lab," she said suddenly. "Help me salvage what research data we can—" Once they were alone in the lab module, Mara secured the door and turned to Lian. "I need your help, and what I'm about to tell you violates about 15 different Confederation protocols." Lian's eyes widened. "Mara, what did you do?" "I found a wounded Krenth in the Crystal Valley. I treated its injuries." The color drained from Lian's face. "You did what? Are you insane? If Voss finds out—" "He won't," Mara said firmly. "But I can't leave that creature out there wounded. The Valkyra might be here looking for it. Or they might be here to kill whoever interfered with one of their kind," Lian countered. "Krenth culture is notoriously isolationist and aggressive toward outsiders." "Then, why didn't the one I treated kill me when it had the chance?" Mara challenged. "It was wounded, not helpless. It could have torn me apart even in its weakened state." Lian ran a hand through her short hair, a gesture of frustration Mara knew well. "What exactly are you proposing?" I need to go back out there before we evacuate. I need to warn it. Absolutely not. You'll be court-martialed or worse, killed. Mara began gathering medical supplies, shoving them into her field kit. I can reach the Crystal Valley and back in 20 minutes if I take the terrain vehicle. No one will even know I'm gone. I'll know, Leon said quietly. And I'll have to report it. Mara paused, looking at her colleague, her friend. Would you? Really? A long moment of silence stretched between them before Leon sighed heavily. Take the emergency beacon. If you're not back in 20 minutes, I'm calling security. Thank you, Mara said fervently, already moving toward the rear exit. Mara, Leon called after her. Be careful. Whatever connection you think you've made with this creature, remember what it is. Predators don't change their nature, even when they're wounded. Mara nodded, but her mind was already focused on the task ahead. 20 minutes to potentially change the course of interspecies relations, or to seal her fate as a casualty of frontier research. Either way, she had made her choice. The Crystal Valley looked different in the deepening twilight, the formations catching the last rays of Zaria's primary sun and transforming them into a kaleidoscope of colored light that would have been beautiful under any other circumstances. Now, the same crystals that created such beauty also cast deep, concealing shadows where anything could hide. Mara navigated the terrain vehicle through a narrow passage, eyes scanning constantly for movement. Where are you? She murmured, as if the Krenth might somehow hear her and reveal itself. A sudden reflection of light on obsidian carapace answered her question. The Krenth emerged from behind a massive crystal formation, moving with far more fluidity than it had hours earlier. Its natural regenerative abilities were already at work. Mara stopped the vehicle and stepped out slowly, hands visible. The Valkyra are here, she said clearly, hoping the creature might somehow understand the gravity of her warning. In orbit. They might be looking for you. The Krenth's neural tendrils pulsed with a rapid rhythm she hadn't observed before. It approached her with surprising speed, stopping just beyond arm's reach. Then, with deliberate movements, it placed one clawed appendage over what she presumed was its primary cardiovascular center, and extended the other toward her. A gesture of gratitude, recognition. I have to leave, Mara continued, pointing upward. My people are evacuating because of the Valkyra. I don't know if they're here to help you or... The Krenth suddenly stiffened, its attention shifting to something beyond her. Mara turned to follow its gaze and felt her heart skip a beat. A Confederation security shuttle was descending rapidly toward their position, searchlights cutting through the twilight. Commander Voss's voice boomed through an external speaker. Dr. Ellis, return to your vehicle immediately. You are in violation of multiple security protocols. The Krenth's posture shifted instantly to a defensive stance, neural tendrils flaring with aggressive pulses of bioluminescence. No, Mara shouted, moving between the creature and the approaching shuttle. Don't attack! They'll kill you! Whether the Krenth understood her words or merely her intent, it hesitated. In that moment of hesitation, Mara made another fateful decision. Hide, she urged the creature, gesturing frantically toward the crystal formations. Please, hide now. To her amazement, the Krenth retreated, its dark exoskeleton disappearing among the shadows of the crystals, just as the shuttle landed. Commander Voss emerged, flanked by 4 security officers with weapons drawn. His face was a mask of cold fury. Dr. Ellis, he said, voice deadly quiet. You were explicitly ordered to prepare for evacuation. Instead, you stole a research vehicle and returned to an unsecured area. Explain yourself. Mara straightened her spine, meeting his gaze directly. I needed to retrieve critical research samples before evacuation. The crystalline flora contains compounds that could revolutionize regenerative medicine. Interesting, Voss replied, his tone suggesting he found it anything but. And these critical samples would be... Where, exactly? Mara gestured to her sample case, praying he wouldn't inspect it closely enough to notice it contained medical supplies, rather than botanical specimens. Sir, one of the security officers interrupted. We're picking up a biological signature nearby. Large. Non-human. Voss's hand went to his sidearm. What species? The officer consulted his scanner, then looked up with widened eyes. Sir, preliminary match suggests Krenth physiology. The commander's expression hardened into something dangerous. Dr. Ellis, step aside. Now. Commander, wait, Mara began, but Voss cut her off with a sharp gesture. Secure Dr. Ellis. He ordered two of his officers. The rest of you, with me. If there's a Krenth in these formations, we need to neutralize the threat before evacuation. You can't, Mara protested, as the officers gripped her arms. It's injured. It's not a threat. Voss paused, turning back to her with a calculating expression. You knew, he said softly. You knew there was a Krenth here. That's why you came back. Mara lifted her chin defiantly. I'm a xenobiologist, Commander. My duty is to preserve life and knowledge, not destroy it out of fear. Your duty, Voss replied coldly, is to follow Confederation protocols, which explicitly forbid unauthorized contact with Tier 1 species. Take her back to the station and prepare her for disciplinary transport. As the officers began dragging her toward the shuttle, Mara called out desperately. It means you no harm. The Valkyra might be here to help it, not to attack us. Voss ignored her, signaling his remaining officers to advance into the crystal formations, with weapons ready. What happened next occurred so quickly that Mara's mind struggled to process it. A blur of obsidian carapace and flashing neural tendrils erupted from the shadows. The Krenth moved with impossible speed for its size, disarming two officers before they could fire a single shot. Voss managed to discharge his weapon once, before a massive clawed appendage sent him flying into a crystal formation with bone-crushing force. The officers holding Mara released her instantly, raising their weapons, but the Krenth was already upon them. With precision that belied its fearsome appearance, it struck both men with the flat of its claws, rendering them unconscious without fatal injury. In seconds, 5 armed Confederation personnel lay incapacitated, and Mara stood face to face with the apex predator she had saved. The Krenth's neural tendrils pulsed with a pattern she now recognized as communication. It extended a clawed appendage toward her, then pointed to the fallen shuttle. You want me to come with you? Mara asked incredulously. The creature made a series of clicking sounds, then gestured again more urgently toward the shuttle. Understanding dawned. You want me to leave, to escape before more come. The Krenth inclined its massive head in what could only be affirmation. Then it did something truly astonishing. It knelt, lowering its head to expose the vulnerable neural cluster at the base of its neck. With one clawed appendage, it made a deliberate mark across this area, drawing a line of luminescent blue blood. Mara had studied enough xenobiology to recognize a ritual when she saw one, even if she didn't understand its significance. This was no random gesture. It was a declaration of something profound. Before she could respond, the distant sound of another approaching shuttle broke the moment. The Krenth rose, its posture conveying unmistakable urgency. I can't just leave them, Mara said, gesturing to the unconscious officers. And there's nowhere to go. The Confederation controls all transport off-planet. The Krenth seemed to consider this, its compound eyes studying her with unsettling intelligence. Then it made a decision. Moving with purposeful strides, it collected the unconscious officers and commander, carrying them effortlessly to the shuttle. After depositing them inside, it returned to Mara and extended its arm in a clear invitation. Against every rational thought, against all her training and the warnings that echoed in her mind, Mara Ellis took the clawed appendage of the galaxy's most feared predator species and allowed it to lead her into the deepening darkness of the Crystal Valley. Behind them, the Confederation shuttle lifted off automatically, its emergency protocols activated to return to the research station with its unconscious passengers. And above them, unseen in the twilight sky, the massive silhouette of a Valkyra warship began its descent toward the planet's surface. 3 months later, Mara Ellis sat cross-legged on a flat, crystalline outcropping, carefully documenting the growth patterns of a particularly resilient species of crystal-veined fungi. The makeshift laboratory she had established in a cave system deep within the valley was primitive by Confederation standards, but it served her needs. The mycelial network has expanded another 12 centimeters since yesterday, she recorded into her personal log. The rate of crystalline integration suggests a symbiotic relationship rather than parasitic infection, as previously hypothesized. A shadow fell across her work, and Mara looked up to see the towering figure of Krenth. Her Krenth, as she had come to think of him, though she knew the possessive was both presumptuous and scientifically inaccurate. Over the past months, they had developed a rudimentary system of communication. The Krenth species possessed no vocal apparatus compatible with human language, and Mara's translator had proven useless for deciphering their complex combination of subsonic rumbles, neural bioluminescence, and pheromone releases. Instead, they relied on a growing lexicon of gestures, drawings in the crystal sand, and occasionally, direct neural contact, a process that left Mara with migraines, but also with fragments of concepts and emotions that transcended verbal language. She had learned that her Krenth was named, or at least, the closest approximation she could process was Krenth Vas Ur, which she had shortened to Krenth for simplicity. He was, as she had suspected, a high-ranking member of Krenth society, though the exact nature of his status remained unclear. What was clear was that he had been ambushed by something while exploring KPX-9's extensive underground crystal cave systems, something that even his formidable abilities couldn't overcome. Krenth gestured now, with a complex pattern of claws and neural pulses that Mara had come to interpret as urgency or warning. "What is it?" she asked, already packing her equipment. The predator pointed skyward, then made a series of gestures that conveyed the concept of many, followed by the gesture they had established for my kind. More Krenth. Coming here. Mara felt a surge of both excitement and apprehension. Scientific curiosity warred with the practical knowledge that multiple Krenth might not share the unusual tolerance, perhaps even respect, that her companion had developed for her. Krenth confirmed with a gesture of affirmation, then added another sequence that she interpreted as soon and powerful ones. "The Valkyra," Mara whispered. "They're coming back." After their initial appearance 3 months ago, the Valkyra ships had departed as mysteriously as they had arrived, leaving the Confederation research station intact, but under heightened security. Mara had been officially listed as missing, presumed dead, a designation that Krenth had ensured remained accurate by keeping her hidden from the periodic search parties sent into the valley. Now, it seemed, the Valkyra were returning in force. Krenth made another series of gestures, these more complex and unfamiliar. When Mara shook her head in confusion, he hesitated, then placed one clawed appendage gently against her temple. "Neural contact?" she asked, already wincing at the thought of the pain that would follow. But she nodded consent. The connection was disorienting as always, a flood of alien concepts and sensory information never meant for human neural pathways to process. But through the chaos, certain impressions emerged with clarity. A massive fleet of Valkyra warships, the concept of honor debt, or lifebound, accompanied by an intense emotion she could only interpret as sacred obligation. An image of herself, standing before an assembly of Krenth leaders, and, most disturbingly, a sense of impending judgment, with her at its center. When the contact ended, Mara staggered, grateful for Krenth's steadying appendage. "They're coming for you," she gasped, as the neural feedback subsided. But also, for me? Why? What am I to them? Krenth's response was a complex series of gestures that conveyed concepts of life-giver, debt, and protection. Then, with deliberate movements, he recreated the ritual mark he had made 3 months earlier, drawing a luminescent line across his neural cluster. "This means something important," Mara said, pointing to the gesture. "Something about me saving your life." The Predator confirmed with an emphatic gesture of affirmation, then added the concepts of binding and unbreakable law. Before Mara could press for clarification, a deep rumbling vibrated through the crystal formations around them. Not a geological disturbance, but the unmistakable acoustic signature of massive engines descending through the atmosphere. Krenth looked skyward, neural tendrils pulsing with a pattern Mara recognized as determination or resolve. Then he turned to her and made a series of gestures she had never seen before, concluding with a formal crossing of his primary appendages across his chest. "I don't understand," Mara said anxiously. "What are you trying to tell me?" In response, Krenth simply extended his arm in the same invitation he had offered 3 months earlier in this very valley. And once again, Dr. Mara Ellis took the hand of the Predator and stepped into the unknown. The Valkyra Judgment Chamber was unlike anything Mara had ever experienced. Constructed within the largest of the warships now orbiting KPX-9, it was a vast, circular space dominated by crystalline architecture that seemed to both absorb and amplify sound. Hundreds of Krenth observed from tiered seating that rose in concentric circles, their neural tendrils creating a hypnotic display of bioluminescent communication that washed across the chamber in waves. Mara stood on a central platform, feeling impossibly small and vulnerable. Krenth stood beside her, his posture rigid with what she had come to recognize as formal dignity. Around them, 7 Valkyra commanders, distinguished by the complex patterns etched into their exoskeletons and the vibrant coloration of their neural clusters, formed a perfect circle. One of these commanders, larger than the others and bearing elaborate scarification across his carapace, stepped forward. His neural tendrils pulsed with a pattern so complex that Mara's eyes could barely track the sequence. "Human female," a mechanical voice translated through a device placed before her. "You stand accused of unauthorized intervention with a Krenth sovereign. This violation of Confederation protocols and Krenth territorial sovereignty carries severe penalties under both systems of law." Mara swallowed hard, fighting to maintain composure. "I am Dr. Mara Ellis, xenobiologist of the Confederation Research Division. I rendered medical assistance to a wounded sentient being, as is my duty as both a scientist and a moral entity." The translation device rendered her words into a series of clicks and subsonic rumbles that reverberated through the chamber. The assembled Krenth responded with a collective pulse of neural activity that seemed to express something between surprise and skepticism. The lead commander's neural tendrils flared. "The one you assisted was not merely a wounded sentient being. Krenth Vasur is fleet commander of the 7th Valkyra Division, bearer of the Obsidian Crest, and guardian of the Eastern Void Territories. His value to our collective is beyond your comprehension." Mara glanced at Krenth, at Fleet Commander Krenth Vasur, with new understanding. No wonder he had possessed such unusual capabilities, even when injured. "I didn't know his rank," she replied simply. "I saw only that he needed help." This statement produced another wave of neural communication among the assembled Krenth, more intense than before. "Irrelevant," the commander responded. "Knowledge or ignorance of his status does not alter the laws you have transgressed. The penalty." Before he could continue, Krenth stepped forward and emitted a complex sequence of sounds that caused immediate silence throughout the chamber. His neural tendrils blazed with such intensity that Mara had to avert her eyes. The translation device remained silent for several moments, apparently unable to process the communication. When it finally spoke again, the mechanical voice seemed to carry a note of astonishment despite its synthesized nature. Fleet Commander Krenthvasser invokes the right of life debt. It translated. He claims this human as his life-giver and demands the protection of ancient law. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of clicking sounds and neural pulses. The lead commander's tendrils flared with what Mara could only interpret as shock or outrage. "Impossible!" the translation continued. "No Krenth has invoked life debt with an outsider in 7,000 cycles. The Council will never—" Krenth interrupted again, this time with a subsonic rumble so powerful that Mara felt it vibrate through her bones. He stepped closer to her, placing one massive clawed appendage on her shoulder in a gesture that needed no translation. Protection. The lead commander's neural activity dimmed to a slow pulse as he studied them both. Finally, he responded with a measured series of clicks. "You understand the full implications of life debt, Fleet Commander? Once invoked, it cannot be revoked. Your existence becomes bound to hers. Your honor becomes dependent on her survival. The Valkyra Legion itself becomes obligated to her protection." Krenth's response was immediate and emphatic, a single sharp gesture that Mara recognized as absolute affirmation. The lead commander turned his compound eyes toward Mara. "Human female, Dr. Mara Ellis, do you understand what is being offered? Do you accept the obligations and privileges of being lifebound to a Krenth fleet commander?" Mara hesitated, acutely aware that she was navigating cultural waters far deeper than her limited understanding could fathom. "I don't fully understand your customs," she admitted honestly. "But I know that I helped Krenthvasser because it was right, not because I expected anything in return." The translation device was silent for a moment, as if processing the nuance of her response. When it resumed, the mechanical voice somehow conveyed a note of grudging respect. "The human claims she acted without expectation of reward or obligation." It translated for the assembly. "This is consistent with the purest form of action that can create life debt." A ripple of neural communication passed through the chamber, different in pattern from the previous waves, less agitated, more contemplative. The lead commander made a gesture that Mara couldn't interpret, then spoke again. "The Council must convene to confirm this unprecedented invocation. Until then, the human remains under the protection of Fleet Commander Krenthvasser and, by extension, the Valkyra Legion." With that pronouncement, the formal assembly began to disperse, though many Krenth lingered, their compound eyes fixed on Mara with what seemed like curiosity or assessment. Krenth turned to her, his neural tendrils pulsing with a pattern she had come to associate with reassurance. He gestured toward an exit, indicating they should leave the chamber. As they walked through the crystalline corridors of the Valkyra warship, surrounded by towering predators, whose very species had been the subject of terrifying legends among human colonists, Mara found herself in the grip of scientific wonder rather than fear. Every aspect of Krenth architecture, technology, and social interaction represented xenobiological data previously unavailable to Confederation researchers. "You've placed yourself at risk for me," she said quietly to Krenth. "Why?" The predator paused, seeming to consider how to communicate such complex concepts. Finally, he placed a clawed appendage gently against her temple, requesting neural contact. Mara nodded, bracing herself for the disorienting connection. This time, the neural link was different, more controlled, less overwhelming. Through it, she received not just impressions, but coherent concepts. "When you found me, you could have taken my life or left me to die. Either would have been justified under the laws of survival that govern all sentient species. Instead, you risked your position, your safety, perhaps your life, to preserve mine, without demanding anything in return. Such action creates the most sacred bond recognized in Krenth culture, the life debt. It transcends all other obligations, all political considerations, all previous alliances. By the oldest laws of our species, My life now belongs to you, not as slave to master, but as guardian to the one who has proven worthy of absolute loyalty. The Valkyra Legion follows me, and now, through the life debt, they are bound to honor my obligation to you." The connection faded, leaving Mara stunned by the implications. "But I didn't ask for this," she whispered. "I don't want to command anyone, especially not an entire military force." Krenth's neural tendrils pulsed with what she had come to recognize as something akin to amusement. He made a series of gestures that conveyed, "That is precisely why you are worthy of it." Before Mara could respond, a Krenth officer approached, neural tendrils flickering with urgent communication patterns. Krenth straightened, his posture shifting to alert readiness. "What's happening?" Mara asked. The officer produced a small device, similar to the translation unit from the chamber. "Confederation vessels approaching," the mechanical voice announced. "Military configuration. They demand return of human researcher and withdrawal of Valkyra forces from Confederation claimed territory." Mara felt a chill of apprehension. "They think I'm a hostage." Krenth's neural tendrils flared with a pattern she interpreted as determination. He issued a series of commands to the officer, who departed immediately. "What did you tell him?" Mara asked. Krenth made gestures conveying, "Prepare for diplomacy, but ready weapons." "No," Mara protested. "There's no need for conflict. I can explain the situation to them." The Predator studied her for a moment, then made a gesture of conditional agreement, followed by a concept she interpreted as, "but from position of strength, not weakness." An hour later, Mara found herself in the Valkyra Command Center, watching as a Confederation diplomatic shuttle docked with the massive warship. The view screens showed a delegation emerging, and at its head, wearing an expression of cold fury, was Commander Voss. "This will be interesting," Mara murmured. Krenth made a gesture that somehow perfectly conveyed sardonic agreement. The diplomatic chamber of the Valkyra flagship pulsed with tension, thick enough to cut with a blade. On one side stood Commander Voss and his Confederation delegation, their formal gray uniforms stark against the organic crystalline architecture. On the other, 7 Valkyra commanders, including Krenth, their neural tendrils communicating in silent patterns incomprehensible to human observers. And in the center, Dr. Mara Ellis, bridge between two worlds that had never sought connection. "Dr. Ellis," Voss began, his voice rigidly controlled, "the Confederation has invested considerable resources in locating you after your abduction. You will return with us immediately for medical evaluation and debriefing." Mara raised an eyebrow. "Abduction, Commander? Is that the official narrative now? Your unauthorized contact with a Tier 1 species, followed by your disappearance during a security incident, leaves few alternative interpretations." Voss replied coldly, "Whatever compulsion or coercion you've been subjected to during these months of captivity will be addressed by Confederation psychologists." The translation device relayed his words to the Krenth commanders, whose neural tendrils flashed with patterns Mara recognized as indignation or offense. "I wasn't abducted, Commander," Mara stated firmly. "I chose to remain with Fleet Commander Krenth Vasseur after rendering medical assistance when he was injured. My actions violated Confederation protocols. I acknowledge that. But they were ethically necessary and have resulted in an unprecedented diplomatic opportunity." Voss's expression hardened. "Dr. Ellis, your judgment has been compromised. These creatures are apex predators, genetically programmed for dominance and aggression. Whatever relationship you believe you've established is nothing more than temporary tolerance until you no longer serve their purposes." The translation device conveyed his words, including the phrase, "these creatures," which produced a ripple of aggressive neural activity among the Valkyra commanders. Krenth stepped forward, his massive form dwarfing the human commander. His neural tendrils pulsed with a measured pattern that the translator rendered in its mechanical voice. "Commander Voss of the Confederation, Your ignorance is matched only by your arrogance. The human doctor, Mara Ellis, is not our captive. She is life-bound to me through the sacred right of life debt, recognized by the Valkyra Council as legitimate and binding. She stands under the protection of the entire Apex Legion. Voss blinked, momentarily thrown by this unexpected statement. Life debt? What nonsense is this? Dr. Ellis is a Confederation citizen and subject to Confederation law. Whatever primitive rituals you've imposed on her have no legal standing in civilized space. Mara winced at the cultural insensitivity of his response. The neural patterns among the Krenth commanders grew more agitated. Commander, she interjected quickly. The life debt is a foundational cultural institution in Krenth society, predating the Confederation by millennia. It's not primitive. It's a sophisticated ethical framework governing reciprocal obligations when one being saves another's life without expectation of reward. And you expect me to believe, Voss replied skeptically, that one of the galaxy's most feared predator species simply adopted you out of gratitude? Krenth's neural tendrils flashed with a pattern Mara had never seen before. The translation device rendered it as not gratitude, honor, concepts perhaps beyond your comprehension, Commander. One of the other Valkyra commanders stepped forward, his carapace bearing elaborate insignia that marked him as particularly high-ranking. The Confederation believes itself the arbiter of all laws in this galaxy. The translator rendered his communication. Yet you are mere children in cosmic terms. The life debt predates your species' first faltering steps beyond your atmosphere. It is recognized by entities far more ancient and powerful than your Confederation. Voss straightened, visibly affronted. Threatening the Confederation would be unwise, regardless of your technological advantages. We have our own powerful allies. Not threatening, the high-ranking commander responded. Educating. The human doctor Mara Ellis is now life-bound to Fleet Commander Krenth Vasseur. By extension, she commands the loyalty of the 7th Valkyra Division. This is not negotiable. Preposterous, Voss snapped. Dr. Ellis, you will return with us now. That's an order. Mara felt the weight of the moment pressing down upon her, the culmination of 3 months of cultural immersion, scientific discovery, and personal transformation. She looked from Voss's rigid, unyielding expression to Krenth's imposing, but now familiar presence. Commander Voss, she said carefully, I am not returning at this time. My work here is not complete. Work? Voss repeated incredulously. What possible scientific value could justify this treasonous collaboration? The first comprehensive xenobiological study of Krenth physiology, culture, and social structures, Mara replied steadily. Data that the Confederation has sought unsuccessfully for over a century. Data that I've been freely gathering with the full cooperation of my subjects, or rather, my colleagues. This gave Voss pause. The scientific value of such information was indeed immense, potentially outweighing even the political complications of her unorthodox methods. Furthermore, Mara continued, seizing the moment of hesitation, through the life debt, I've been granted unprecedented access to Krenth territory previously closed to Confederation researchers. Access that could be extended to other carefully selected scientists, under the right diplomatic conditions. The calculated appeal to potential scientific and political advantage had its intended effect. Voss's expression shifted from outright rejection to reluctant calculation. The Confederation Council would require assurances, he said slowly. Guarantees of safety for its citizens, formal recognition of existing territorial boundaries, perhaps exchange of certain non-critical technologies. Krenth's neural tendrils pulsed with a pattern Mara recognized as cautious interest. Conditions may be discussed, the translator rendered his response, but the status of Dr. Mara Ellis as lifebound remains non-negotiable. Voss looked at Mara with narrowed eyes. And if I simply order my security team to extract you by force? Before Mara could respond, Every Krenth in the chamber shifted to combat readiness, neural tendrils blazing with threatening patterns. Clawed appendages extended. The message required no translation. "That would be unwise, Commander," Mara said quietly. "And unnecessary. I propose a compromise. I will maintain my Confederation citizenship and continue my research under joint supervision. The data I collect will be shared with Confederation Science Division, advancing our understanding of a species that has remained largely mysterious to us. In return, the Confederation formally recognizes the cultural validity of the life debt and my unique status as liaison between our species." Voss was silent for a long moment, weighing options and potential consequences. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "I will present your proposal to the Council. Until their decision, you remain technically under Confederation protection and jurisdiction." Krenth stepped forward, towering over the human commander. "Incorrect," the translator rendered his response. "Until all agreements are formalized, Dr. Mara Ellis remains under Valkyra protection through the life debt. The Confederation may claim jurisdiction, but the Apex Legion enforces it." The tension in the chamber escalated once more. Two incompatible systems of authority clashing at their fundamental levels. Mara moved between them, physically embodying the bridge she hoped to build. "Both protections apply," she stated firmly. "That's the whole point of what we're creating here. A new framework where multiple systems of law and obligation can coexist." She turned to Voss. "Commander, I understand your position. You're bound by Confederation protocols and responsible for all personnel under your command. I respect that." Then, she turned to Krenth. "And I honor the sacred obligation of the life debt, recognizing its profound significance in your culture." Looking between them, she continued, "But neither system is served by conflict. Both gain immeasurably more through cooperation and mutual recognition." A moment of silence followed her words. Then, with visible reluctance, Voss inclined his head in minimal acknowledgement. "The Confederation will consider your proposed arrangement. In the interim, we will establish a permanent communication link and require regular status reports." Krenth's neural tendrils pulsed with a pattern of conditional acceptance. "The Valkyra Legion will permit Confederation presence in orbit around KPX-9 for diplomatic purposes. A single research outpost may be re-established on the surface, under joint protection." The terms weren't perfect for either side, but they represented something unprecedented. The beginning of genuine dialogue between species that had previously regarded each other with nothing but suspicion and potential hostility. As the formal negotiations concluded and the delegates prepared to depart, Commander Voss approached Mara privately. "Dr. Ellis," he said in a low voice, "off the record, are you certain about this? These creatures are predators by nature. Whatever bond you think you formed could dissolve in an instant if their interests change." Mara met his gaze steadily. "With respect, Commander, you're applying human psychology to a non-human species. The life debt isn't a temporary alliance of convenience. It's a fundamental ethical construct woven into the very fabric of Krenth society. Breaking it would be unthinkable to them. Like suddenly deciding gravity doesn't apply." Voss studied her face, searching for signs of coercion or delusion. Finding none, he sighed. "The Council won't like this. You've essentially made yourself the linchpin of a diplomatic relationship nobody asked for, with a species many would prefer to continue avoiding." "Sometimes the most important relationships are the ones nobody planned," Mara replied. "History is full of accidental discoveries that changed everything." "Let's hope this particular accident doesn't end in interstellar incident," Voss muttered, turning to rejoin his delegation. As the Confederation representatives departed, Krenth approached Mara, his neural tendrils pulsing with a pattern she had come to associate with curiosity or inquiry. "Yes, I'm staying," she confirmed before he could communicate the question. "Though I suspect my career in the Confederation Research Division just took a very unconventional turn." Krenth's response needed no translation. a gesture that clearly conveyed, "They will adapt, as you have adapted to us." Mara smiled, the absurdity of her situation suddenly striking her full force. 3 months ago, she had been a conventional xenobiologist documenting crystal flora on a frontier planet. Now she stood aboard a Valkyra warship, lifebound to a Krenth fleet commander, potentially reshaping diplomatic relations between two previously hostile species. "What happens now?" she asked. Krenth's neural tendrils pulsed with a pattern she interpreted as anticipation or even excitement. He gestured toward the vast view screen that dominated the command center, where stars stretched into infinity beyond the atmosphere of KPX-9. The translation device rendered his response, "Now, Life-Giver, we explore the shadow territories beyond Confederation space, places no human has documented, species no xenobiologist has cataloged. With the Apex Legion as your protectors and research assistants." Mara felt a surge of scientific exhilaration at the prospect. "That sounds like the research opportunity of a lifetime." Krenth's neural tendrils pulsed with a pattern of affirmation, followed by what she had come to recognize as his version of humor. "For someone who asked nothing in return for saving a predator's life, you have acquired much." Looking around at the advanced Valkyra technology, the uncharted stars awaiting exploration, and the unprecedented access to a civilization previously closed to human science, Mara could only nod in agreement. "Sometimes," she replied, "the greatest rewards come from actions taken with no expectation of reward at all." Krenth's neural tendrils pulsed with a pattern that required no translation. Perfect understanding between predator and savior, between two species that had found connection in the most unlikely of circumstances. As the massive Valkyra warship prepared to depart KPX-9's orbit, carrying them toward unknown horizons, Dr. Mara Ellis felt not fear, but anticipation. The universe had just become infinitely larger and more complex, and she had been granted the extraordinary privilege of documenting it all, protected by the most fearsome predators in known space. All because, in a moment of compassion, she had asked nothing from the predator she saved. And now the Apex Legion obeyed him without question, and by extension, they obeyed her.